There we are. So hello everyone and welcome to a brand new Winspiration just in time for International Women's Day, which is happening at the start of March. It is lovely to see so many of you here, both new and familiar faces, as we come together to champion women's contribution to the library and information sector, working together to ensure that Scotland's libraries are places where all women from all walks of life feel included, supported and celebrated. So just a little bit of feminist housekeeping first. We are recording, as you've heard, so it was lovely to see all your faces, and you're welcome to keep your cameras on or off, entirely what you prefer. If you're struggling with bandwidth at all, we'd probably suggest off. And the subtitles have been activated. You should be able to switch them on or off using the bar of Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. Just so that we can hear, Amina, if you can keep your microphones muted unless you're asking a question, that would be wonderful. And yes, if you got a notification saying that we're live streaming, all that means is the captions are live. So don't worry, we're not quite broadcasting worldwide yet. And as we've mentioned, this is an winspirational conversation. So please get involved, sharing your thoughts, your ideas, your questions in the chat box. It's wonderful to see everyone saying hello there already. We're going to start off with a little discussion based on some of the questions we've already received, but please feel free to pop others in the chat or use the raise hand function and we will come to as many as we possibly can. And now, what we've all been waiting for, it is such a delight to introduce a woman who I know is an inspiration to countless others in our sector and beyond, myself very much included. Amina Shah is not only CILIPS President, but National Librarian and Chief Executive of the National Library of Scotland, the first woman and the first person of mixed heritage to hold the posts in the library's near century of existence. Amina will be leading the National Library as it celebrates its centenary in 2025, and she knows Scotland's libraries like few others, having also worked in public libraries, academic libraries, for the Scottish Library and Information Council, for Scottish Book Trusts, and having generally been a force for good in our sector for over 20 years, which you must have started working when you were 10, Amina. That doesn't sound legal.
Believe me.
Amina also has another incredibly important role as a mother of 4, and we are so grateful to her for taking the time out of her very busy schedule to share her reflections on what has changed, perhaps what's yet to change, for women working in libraries, the power of positive role models to shape library cultures for the better, and how both strength and vulnerability can be valuable to a 21st century library leader. So thank you so much, Amina. It is a joy to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks, Kirsten. It's an absolute pleasure. And it's so thanks to everyone that's come along this morning as well. It's lovely to see so many people that I know as well, and lovely to see familiar faces. But I really want to thank you, Kirsten, for this whole Winspiration series, because I think that's a really great example of using a platform to promote and celebrate feminism and women and equality. And I think you're doing such great work in that area, you, CILIPS and CILIPS. So, huge thanks to you.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Thank you so much. And it's definitely a community effort, as we can see today. Everybody's playing their part and everybody's involved. So thank you so much. That's wonderful.
And also, I just want to say now, before going to this, as many of you will know, I am actually no academic expert in feminism. So much of what I'm going to say today is, largely based on my own anecdotal journey, different folk and different people I've met and seen and come across. And I hope as well that I'd learn from you today, because I really want to hear more from all of you. So please do use the chat and let me know what you think, because I was conscious that when Adele did her talk before, she mentioned that we have a global toxic masculinity crisis in politics. And I sit here today with, I believe Kiev has been taken over, and we're seeing this actually playing out. And it's just a frightening reminder to us all, actually, about how much we do need to fight for equalities and the right to speak out about things. And yeah, it's really interesting where we are today. Quite somber thinking about it, actually.
Totally, very well said, Amina. Thank you for raising that. And I know that all our thoughts and feelings are with Ukraine at the moment. And I think that idea of women really being experts in their own lives and their own experiences coming to the fore. Hopefully that is something that we can bring out today. And actually, having said that, I wonder if we could start with your own journey into feminism, and personally as much as professionally, because I know that you come from a heritage and from a family of very strong women who needed that strength in many ways. I wonder if you could introduce some of them for us.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was thinking about this a little bit actually, about what my own thoughts on feminism are, and how it's grown around me, and how I've been aware of it. So my auntie, when I was 8 and living in Edinburgh, or actually I must have been younger than that actually, come to think of it, but my auntie came to live with us because from Pakistan, and she had been forced into an arranged marriage with her cousin over there when she was really quite young, and she wasn't able to go and carry on her education. And then she had 5 children with her husband, and then she left him, and for a poet actually. And that is actually punishable by being stoned to death in Pakistan at that time. And I Googled it before I came on, today still. And in the village where I was born, in Pakistan, just a few months ago, a man was beaten to death by a mob for blasphemy. So, it's very much still, there are lots of sort of things going on in that area, which I think is interesting. So anyway, my Auntie Jan came to live with us to escape that kind of threat. And I wasn't really fully aware of the story behind it, but she did stay with us at that time. And she moved on and was really brave in her life, and created a school where she would offer support. It wasn't an actual school, but where she would sort of offer support to women who were trying to stay on in education, and sometimes offer them housing and support that they might have needed to be able to do that, where their families weren't supportive of that. So, that was looking back, she's been a really big influence on me, I suppose. And I've actually seen firsthand the bravery that it takes actually to change things and to stand up against things that aren't fair, or for your own independence and your own empowerment. And also around that time, my mum started being involved in lots of women's groups. And I mention this because it was really interesting, because I was talking about this in the library recently. And of course, my amazing colleagues in the National Library immediately sent me a link to a publication that she was involved with that I had mentioned, called Peely Wally. And on the back of this book of Peely Wally, there's a picture of my mum and other women standing on the meadows in 1980s. I think it was like 1982 or something when they were publishing it. And it was a women's health manual. And it was, of course, before the internet. So my mum's job was to find information. So in a way, she was being a bit like a librarian, but she had worked in libraries before, but she didn't work at that time. So it was a voluntary thing. And putting together information about women's health, about sexual health advice, about abortion advice, about legal advice that women could get, etc. So, she was really involved in that, and she made lots of friends in that group who used to hang about our house in Edinburgh a lot, and they used to drink loads of cups of tea and hang out in our kitchen. They were really amazing women, and some of them had been on Greenham Common, and they were really strong, powerful women. And others, I remember one particular woman whose daughter was dying of AIDS, which at that time in Edinburgh, of course, there was a big crisis in terms of that, and was really sad. And so there was all sorts of different people, is what I want to say, around my kitchen table and in my life, from my Pakistani family, and then my mum. And my mum, although my dad had my auntie came over to stay with us, my dad was a really strict Muslim, and actually a victim of toxic masculinity culture himself, because he was actually afraid often of the other people's opinions and what people might say. And really, it's quite sad when you look back and think of seeing someone in that position, that it could distance them from friends and family, because what other people thought was so important. And I don't think that's just something that was in his culture from Pakistan. I think there's that exists across the piece, you know, it's everywhere. I'm pretty sure there's lots of you that might have similar stories of knowing men that have, or women that have felt that's really powerful. So yeah, so in thinking about that, I had all these powerful influences, but I was also of that age where I really admire all the young women like you, Kirsten, that are coming through the profession that really are talking about feminism quite openly. There's a huge amount of LGBT discussions. There's a lot of people being very just, you know, owning all of that discussion at the moment, which wasn't really the case when I was growing up and when I was a teenager, and it wasn't something that people spoke about that much, although, and you know, there were obviously we were benefiting from our parents' generation had done an enormous amount to improve the situation for us, and we're up against a lot. So yeah, I think my own journey to awareness of it has been sort of flowing. I would never say I was always kind of completely aware of feminism, but now it's something that's absolutely front and center of my mind at the moment.
Well, that's incredible. And I think if people are speaking about it more, it's because of those foundations that were laid by women like your mum, like your Auntie Jan. And I know that her story's on the Padlet as well, so people will be able to see it, because it's just such a powerful and shockingly timeless, the fact that that could still be the penalty. It's just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And
on the other hand as well, a man under Sharia law can divorce his wife by saying, I divorce you 3 times. You know, so there's that, and homosexuality is still illegal. And I've had a family member who's had to leave because of that. So, you know, these are things that across the world, and I think that's when Adele was talking about intersectional feminism. I think that's the key, isn't it, to understanding that the situation that might be the case for one person, even in the country or the world, is determined on class, on privilege, on where you are, on race, on ethnicity. There's so many things determining that, and we need to see it all in the round.
Definitely 100%. And I think that is why it's so vital to listen to each other and to create spaces where people can share their stories. And what I really love about the story of your Aunt Jan as well is that it wasn't just, even as if that's an easy thing to do, to pursue her own freedom, but she was so passionate about giving other women the tools to do that as well.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the point you make as well about your dad and cultures of how, Kathleen's put a really great comment in the chat that was talking with male colleagues about toxic masculinity and leadership. It impacts negatively on us all, and you're right, we're really seeing that this week.
Exactly. We see it on a worldwide stage, but also within workplaces. And actually, I guess that when I was thinking about this talk and libraries, some of that comes to my mind as well, around other people that have been around. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Well, actually, shall we touch on that then? Because I know that you'll have had role models and perhaps figures that you remember for the wrong reason as well. So it sounds as if professionally too, there have been really key figures that have shaped your thinking about libraries and leadership cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely have benefited hugely from the fact that people fought before me to sort of lay a ground, you know, that allows for women's rights, for maternity leave, for example. So I had my son Felix in 1999, and I remember speaking to women in the Mitchell Library where I worked at the time, who told me that they had to leave their jobs when they got pregnant. That was just, you had to. And you know, they were quite, and that's within, which is what an interesting, I was talking to you earlier about this person and you were quite shocked about that, but that's within my memory. I know from the faces here that I see, many of you will remember that too. And I was actually then thinking, well, what was this? You know, was it that you just weren't allowed to be pregnant and stay on at work? But also, of course, it goes a bit deeper. You weren't, at some stages, you weren't even allowed to be married and stay on at work. And I think those things really affect, you know, it had made a massive difference. So many of the women that came before me and all of us, they really fought hard for those principles. But interestingly, amongst them, and I know that those of you are here that will know this to be true, there were some that were incredibly fierce and would actually, in some ways, pick up on the toxic masculinity. They've just put the fear of God into all of us. And they certainly weren't always, in my experience, some people weren't always in the long distant past the quickest to embrace things like flexible working or, doing, enabling other people to do things. And in actual fact, I think it's really, really interesting. And I wondered what that's about. So I was reading the feminist Bell Hooks, and she talks a lot about how class affected a lot of things, so that white women of privilege might have achieved and got into positions of power, but then did they put a ladder down to help everybody else, or did they sort of maintain their own authority and position over working class men, over Black men as well as women? Did they change things? And in a sense, I think she's absolutely right. But there's also, from talking about my experience with Scottish libraries, I thought there's something else here that was going on with that, and I don't actually know quite what it was. And I spoke to a woman who used to work in the National Library of Scotland many years ago, and she retired about 25 years ago, and she's really knowledgeable. And I asked her about this marriage bar thing, and she said, oh yes, that was definitely a thing. And she said, but when that was lifted, and a lot of women, and actually it wasn't lifted until the 70s for the foreign civil service, but for the home civil service, it was 1946 when the official marriage bar was lifted. And this is for civil service workers. But of course, it wasn't really possible for many women to carry on, especially if they had children. But this woman I spoke to said, but of course, many of these women that were quite formidable in the past they lost their husbands in the war, or their betrothed people in the war, and they were single, and they had been almost, the word she used was that the women were tolerated at some levels, but only if you expected to be treated like everybody else and not get special service. And by that was meaning as if you acted like, if you held up all the kind of ways of work and being that existed, which I thought was really fascinating, actually. But as well as that, obviously, there were people who really made a difference. Like my partner's mum was the first woman, or the only woman who was studying accountancy in her class at the time in the 80s. And I know in the libraries in Dundee in particular, where I worked, well, there were a huge number of strong women there, because Dundee is quite a matriarchal place. And actually, I was doing a project when I worked there about the Great War, and you realize, I think a third of the men in Dundee were lost in one of the battles in the First World War, and that meant that women in Dundee were always having to work. So, and Bell Hooks talks about that in her feminist books as well, that when we talk about working and feminism, and in fact, working class women have always worked. They just didn't have any power, no matter how hard they worked. And you see that today. I mean, child poverty is still one of the #1 issues that we're dealing with in Scotland, and the Scottish government have put it as a top priority. So we haven't tackled that. And a lot of that is because being in work doesn't necessarily mean that you can afford to have a good life or seek self-fulfillment. So I think there's lots of complicated things around that. But certainly, there are lots of women that I worked with at the time that I owe a huge debt to, that have really paved the way, and also supported me personally as well throughout my career. So it's, I don't want to name names because it's too much, but I think some people will know the people that I'm talking about. But also, there are many women that I see now that are actually being really bold and confident and breaking down boundaries. And there are many men that I've worked with who've also done that. And I think that that's another thing that's huge. And you mentioned in the sort of overview about the book that I've been reading, why is her name just completely gone out of my mind? Mary Portas.
Mary Portas.
Yeah. And so she's written a book called Work Like a Woman. And then after the pandemic, she wrote another book called Rebuild. And both of them are really fascinating. So she talks about the fact that, you know, she was actually an alpha and got on quite well in that sort of male culture, and she totally loved it. But what she realized is, and I think this is so true, we're facing crisis in our culture and society, which require different ways of thinking. If you think about the climate crisis, if you think about the crisis that's happened after COVID, if you think about equality issues and social justice issues that have come to the fore, these things require collaboration, they require openness, they require dialogue, they're about including people. All of these things are in opposition almost to the way that workplaces have been set up in the past, and the structure of things, which is a lot about dominance and counting, measuring in terms of numbers. You know, look at Putin, you know, gaining control, gaining power, and doing everything you can to retain that. And I think that so much has shifted recently that there's a real opportunity, and people seem to be open to this and coming out about and speaking about these things, about working differently. And as we come out of the pandemic, many organizations, we are at the National Library, are thinking, what have we learned from this experience that we can take forward about work? How can work change to support people differently?
Totally, it's a whole paradigm shift that's necessary, isn't it? And I think in many ways feminism is that opportunity, but feminism also needs to do it and look to itself. And I think it's so great when you highlight bell hooks and women like her, that we're unafraid to confront feminism's own ranks of prejudice, of classism. You know, we're not exempt from needing to reflect and to bear these things in mind. And again, it will benefit everyone if and when we do.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. To use an opportunity to make a change rather than taking the benefits of the changes that have gone before and not actually actioning any of that. And that equally, I think, applies to the workplace, but also about the work that we do and the people that the research, the users, the services, you know, the way that we design things around humans, I think is something that we can take forward from this. It's really a change, I think.
Definitely. And I think the National Library is certainly, if recent exhibitions are anything to go by, you guys are leading the way in that. We'll briefly hop back in time because we've got so many comments in the chat, just echoing what you've said about the marriage bar and one's experiences, and saying my mother had to stop working in her job when she got married. Alison pointing out that my mum paid a lower national insurance stamp when she started teaching, and they were expected to leave when they got pregnant. I remember actually my grandma told me about my Aunt May, who was her elder sister. She wasn't allowed out during the day when she was pregnant. It was thought of as disrespectful to just, heaven forbid, a man's eyes glance on this bump, or goodness knows the world will end. But it's just unbelievable. And I think actually Scotland seems to have been a place of quite rigid, at least on the surface, quite rigid gender norms at times, which have caused problems for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, I know there's so many stories. It's brilliant to see these people saying that. And I know that people will know that. But even in 1999, when I had Felix, my eldest son, maternity clothes, you didn't really get workwear that was maternity clothes related. And that's actually a really good example of the shift, I think. I know it's really flippant to say that, but I mean, you couldn't get tights. You couldn't get, you only had sort of big floral dresses that were sort of had to hide the bump. And around the time I had Felix was the time, I think, Victoria, not that it was a Spice Girls sort of era. And I remember Victoria Beckham, in fact, I think 2 Spice Girls were pregnant around that same time. And they were quite they wore tight clothes and they were flaunting their bump. And that was kind of outrageous. So, you know, nobody really sort of did that. And I know that yeah, it sounds like a small thing, but it's a big thing because it kind of shows that they weren't really expecting women to be out and about and visibly pregnant. It was almost like offensive that you were sort of going
like
about doing it.
actions speak louder than words, and if you can't get into work, if you're not able to dress for work, and it's just it's a very clear message that the world is sending.
Exactly. Well, it's almost like the story of the astronaut, which was only a couple of years ago, you know, that female astronaut, which she couldn't go into space because they didn't have a suit for her. You know, there's that everyday sexism thing that's still going on a very basic level around clothing, which is just crazy.
Absolutely. Actually, I hope this isn't too much information for everybody, but I remember they said at the same time as the press coverage of that, the male technicians had asked how many sanitary products she would need for a month, and would it be, was 100 a good guess? You know, it just shows the ludicrousness of systems that are designed for men by men.
Exactly. And or actually, and it's not just about men. This is where the intersection thing comes in. It's this idea that maybe we should ask people what would be useful, or things should be done collaboratively instead of making assumptions around things. And there's that researcher that's written that, but I can't remember her name actually now. It's amazing about that sort of, somebody else will probably know, put it in the chat, about how things are designed. Seatbelts aren't designed for women, you know, just basic things that haven't been designed because they've always been taken from a point of view of this is the standard, and the standard tends to be an average white man. And that is true for so much, you know, it runs across many things, not just about women, but about race and other things too.
Absolutely. And it feeds into the point that you made so eloquently earlier about women who perhaps pulling the ladder up behind them. And I think it was just a question of how well you could fit in with these previous norms, these previous standards, and the constant threat that if you didn't, you would lose your place, you would lose everything that you'd worked for.
Yeah, and also something that we don't talk about, but really bothers me, is this idea that you have to be really hard to be a proper leader. And actually, sometimes as women, we fall into that trap as well of thinking that other people who are leading, who things like changing your mind or asking people opinion or checking things are viewed as weaknesses, or having emotion or empathy have been viewed as weaknesses at times. And in men and women, and that's where, you know, the toxic masculinity thing comes in. And I think that that's something, I think that in a sense we have to be really strong and brave about, and we have an opportunity, I think, that's come through COVID, where you see people like Jacinda Ardern. I just am in awe of her, you know, just to actually say, I am going to protect people, and I'm going to look after, this is what I'm going to use my power to do, is to do that, or to reach out and have empathy. I think I've mentioned to you about the Vice Principal of Leeds University, the Vice Chancellor of Leeds University, so she's the woman in charge, Simone Butenjik, I think I can't pronounce her surname properly, but she's got a blog, and she actually has written a blog about what's love got to do with it, which I thought was incredibly brave in an HE environment, about how important it is to love your job, for us to be a community, to respect other people and do those things. And actually that kind of empathy and displaying that sort of empathy requires incredible bravery, because you actually have to be more brave to stand alone and say, no, I'm not going to be judged by the standards of the past. I'm going to make a new path that is more inclusive and open. And I see so many people around the world doing that. And Michelle Obama is another person that did that so well. She went out there and just was herself, to then open up the possibility for other women to think, well, gosh, I could be myself and do things like that. And I think that's really, really powerful.
1,000%. I couldn't agree more. And Michelle Obama, it's just, I think that idea of, it fits into this repression or suppression of pregnancy, of motherhood, of this idea that your personal life is something to hide. You think there are values and benefits that people can bring by looking at their life in the round, and that being allowed to flourish in a workplace rather than being repressed. Oh, thank you, Sophie. I was going to put the link for Simone's wonderful article, What's Love Got to Do with It? It's actually here
Oh, you're
Oh
on
no, I
mute.
got muted. Here I am back. Sorry, guys. Getting too excited. Sophie's kindly put the link to What's Love Got to Do with It. That's Simone's wonderful article. And again, just total paradigm shifter. And you're right, the courage that that takes. And I think it shakes up what we think of as strength and what we think of as vulnerability. It's really powerful. And people are putting in, it's Invisible Women, I think is the book that we're thinking of, with things being designed for.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah, absolutely.
I have been struggling to keep up with the chat, guys. There's so
I know,
much.
it's amazing comments. Yeah, I wish we were all in the room so we could just
Pointing out that
blather about
maybe
all.
growing up in Dundee, that was why she's never considered gender a barrier, growing up with these powerful, successful women. And it's just so interesting how history fit. I think people expect history to be linear, but it's not always the case. And, you know, there's a lot of richness to be found if we hear these stories and celebrate these stories. And I have to highlight Yvonne also echoing that when she was pregnant in 1994, surgical stockings were all that she could get hold of. And in fact, oh no, go on, Amina, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say another extension of the pregnancy thing that I'm seeing now, and you know, it's interesting if we get on to what needs to change. One of the emerging things that I'm hearing a lot about now is menopause understanding, for example. And I remember working in the library when I first went into Dundee. I was like 25 or 26, and I remember there was a group of women who at that time were all in their 50s, and they were always hot and, you know, fanning themselves and things. And I remember there was a kind of sense of, oh, for goodness sake, they're being really quite unprofessional by like being open about these problems. But, you know, all of these things, you know, even sanitary products, which now are freely available in lots of libraries, we're handing them out, we're putting them in the bathrooms. When I was in St Andrews in the university, we'd be really keen to give them out free for students, etc. We're realizing period poverty. Well, there was a time, I mean, people would be hiding sanitary products. You know, you almost had to pretend that you didn't have periods, or that you didn't have menopause, that you didn't have, you know, so it's really bizarre that these things are the case when, you know, over 50% of the population are women and going through all these things. It's really, yeah, I see someone saying militant about needing to. I think that's absolutely right. And I think we should all be militant about not suffering and not pretending that we aren't who we are and that we aren't going through, that we aren't a whole person. I think that that's really, and people, when you see other people leading and being open about these things, it really helps everyone.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so many people are echoing in the chat. And I think there has been a real, libraries are actually leading the way, because I know that 5 libraries have done their menopause projects, and it's just it's having these conversations, even words being in everyday dialogue. That's a start. I mean, there's still a long way to go, but even these conversations were not happening 5-10 years ago. And again, it's that barrier to women belonging in the workplace fully. There's all these little messages of do you belong or do you not, and what do you need to do to belong?
Exactly. And actually, I think there's a staggering statistic about the number of women who leave work in middle age because of the menopause, because they can't cope with the symptoms of it and working, or they decide not to go for promotions, not to go for additional work because of that. And if they're leaving work or cutting down hours, that has a financial impact on people's pensions, on people's future. So it's a really real a real impact.
Definitely. And from the, not that it's from the workplace's point of view, but the loss of potential, of ideas,
Exactly.
of experience, you know, that's never going to be replaced if women are not, you know, not comfortable, if not able to inhabit workplaces and belong properly. There's actually another book, and I can't remember, hopefully somebody will remember the title. It's Feminist City. And she was saying even the way that public transport is designed, it centres a certain narrative, which is men travelling from the suburbs to workplaces, whereas actually a lot of the travel that women would be doing perhaps from house to house, or women who are domestic workers, you think you need to travel between suburbs. You don't need to necessarily get into the centre of a city and back again. And yet even the transport network, you know, I've got relatives, if they don't drive, you know, it's 2 buses to get everywhere that they need to go. And just these constant chipping away on which we could easily turn the tide and say, this is your world, you belong. So many echoes of just This is incredible, guys. Thank you so much for sharing. Menopausitive. I like the sound of that group. And Kathleen's top tip from that was Janie Godley's advice. If you need to get your way in a meeting, mention leakage. Love it. A noisy incinerator in the office. Yeah, that's not exactly thought through, is it?
It's interesting because I came across a colleague of mine, Suzanne, was really helpful when I was doing this talk, and I'd asked her about the marriage bar and things like that, and she had looked up some things about the history of the civil service and women, and there was a really interesting line, I'll see if I can find it, about why, when they decided that women might be allowed and useful in the workplace, there were some things that they said. So what they thought was at this time that they were going to be possibly quite useful in clerical roles as sort of operators. They have an eminent degree of quickness of eye and ear and a delicacy of touch, which are essential qualifications of a good operator. They take more kindly than men or boys to sedentary employment and are more patient during long confinement to one place. The wages offered will attract male operators from an inferior class of the community and will attract females from a superior class. The superior class women will write and spell better than the inferior men. Women are less disposed to get together to extort higher wages, and women will not require increases related to length of service, as they will retire for the purpose of getting married as soon as they have a chance. Now, that was actually why they said, like, women should come into the workplace. They'll be helpful because they won't cause us that much bother. And actually, for many years, didn't really.
Oh my gosh, the anthropological horror of that, as if I can hear this sort of David Attenborough voiceover saying the women in their natural environment and deploy that delicate touch carefully. It's just.
I know, absolutely. And part of all of that is all around, yeah, Jill, are you going to get your resignation?
No, Jill, libraries don't want to lose you.
But the idea is that they would just be good girls and be quiet and be useful but not say anything. And I think if anyone's been observing the women who in HE who've been out on strike recently about the pensions, you can see that they're definitely not just taking these things in that way now. There's a really a big sea change, which is really interesting.
Well-behaved women rarely make history, as we like to say. Oh, guys, now this is amazing. I was actually going to invite everybody to pop over to the Padlet and put their ideas about one thing that needs to change, but I feel like we've got so many already just coming in. And thank you, Penny. I think the stat is 1 in 4 women consider leaving the workplace over the age of 51. So that's 3.5 women from the workplace. This is, if you ask a librarian, they'll find you the stats before you know it. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that's, if you want to comment on one of the things I was thinking about for this is just that there's so much still to do, that actually we think that we've got equality, and as I said earlier, that equality, even what we have in this country, thinking on a global stage is quite big. But if we could think about what could we change now, what still needs to change, I would love to hear people's views on that, about where there are still inequalities. And I was talking to a friend recently who's an author, and she had said she has a child, and it's really difficult, for example, to go to events in the evening, to go to events in Edinburgh, to go to, retreats. A lot of things are designed around men who can freely travel, or people who can independently travel with money as well. So I think there's that, and then there's just lots of other things I think that we're still on a journey towards, and I'd really love to know what we could do together to improve the situation for women and men.
Absolutely. So I've put the link for the Padlet in the chat box there. And in fact, I'll share the screen because I can see we've had so many additions even while we've been talking. This is wonderful.
Oh, amazing.
So look at
all the pregnant police chief in Fargo. That's so true.
Love Frances McDormand. She's Olive Kitteridge as well, isn't she? Oh, amazing. Here's your Auntie Jan.
Oh yes, amazing. No, it's amazing to see all of these.
Give everybody a heart that I haven't.
The Scottish swimmers, wow.
And what comes through so often is the idea that these women, they supported others. I think just what you're touching on, Amina.
Yes.
Oh, this is wonderful. I should admit that's me. That's my mum's. That's me with my first book when I was a baby.
That's lovely.
Oh, so please do keep adding to this. What's one thing that you think needs to change? I think menopause awareness, anything that we've touched on today, and this will stay on our feminism for libraries. There it is. It will stay on the CILIPS page, because this is just such a wonderful resource. Oh, I can't believe this.
I think the resources that you've put together, Kirsten, and that Philip put together is really fantastic. You know, it's really great when Adele was talking, and there were so many good references to different women writers and academics that she mentioned there, talking about libraries. And I was sort of furiously writing them down, and then I remembered that you have all these resources online. And I think even just creating these spaces to talk is really good, and to share thoughts and ideas and experiences.
Oh, 100%. So please do keep sending them in, everyone. We love to get the recommendations, and it's so nice when the page becomes something that belongs to us all, as it looks like that Padlet is starting to become as well. I cannot believe the time we are rattling through today. So I think, shall we touch on the National Library itself? Because I mentioned at the beginning that you're going to be leading the library into its centenary in 2025. And several of the recent exhibitions, Petticoats and Pinnacles, Henrietta Liston's Travels, they are really inspiring in the way that they're centering women and using the collections to do that. So do you think that's something that all libraries can do, to perhaps just a few changes that might in the way we use our collections to tell women's stories?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think they do. I must say, I know that lots of libraries do already do that. Well, the library has a strategy which meant some of you might know about, called Reaching People, which takes us from 2020 to 2025. And many of you will know that I was on the board of the library before I joined, and I know that that strategy obviously was developed with staff and board members, and across the sector too, before the pandemic. But it actually highlighted things, and one of the key that have come out since the pandemic, really, one of the key ones is addressing the silences within our collections. And I remember board discussions at the time, some people saying, what does that mean? You know, what are these silences? And actually, that's exactly the thing that Petticoats and Pinnacles and Henrietta Liston, for example, bring out, but many, many other opportunities to bring out these stories. We're a legal deposit library, so we take everything. So we have a lot, but what hasn't happened, and actually Petticoats and Pinnacles is a great example of this. The research hadn't been done into the stories about the women. And in fact, some of the women mountaineers and travellers, Paula, who's our curator, who put that exhibition together, she says that in the past, people had said, well, should this be published? And it was like, nah, that won't happen. And I know when I worked at Scottish Book Trust, we did quite a lot of work on this, and we actually had a Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities PhD researcher look at women's writing and publishing, and what is published and what. It's not that women aren't writing or weren't writing, or that these stories didn't exist. It's just that they weren't the ones that were told. And when it comes to organizations, cultural institutions, public libraries are the same. It was often rich white men's collections that were donated that have then created our collections. And so, but what's within those are stories, amazing stories. And that's where we need the public to research, independent people to research, authors and creatives, people like yourself, Kirsten, but also academic researchers, and linking in to find new stories, not just about women, but about there's an amazing story that a woman has been researching, Shasta Ali, about women that came over, the Ayahs that came over from India to Britain, and often they weren't even named. So these were the nannies of the children of people who came over after colonialism. And they were just called Ayah, you know, the Campbell family and their Ayah. So where are these stories if you haven't got the names of the people? How do you bring them out? And that needs work and attention. And another story that I'm going to share, and I see Alison there, I have spoken to colleagues about sharing this more widely so it's known, but we've actually come across, we have a group in the library looking at hidden collections, which again is within our strategy. And what does that mean, hidden collections? Well, obviously it's collections that we have that aren't available for people, that they aren't catalogued, they aren't available online, people don't know they're there. Every single library in the world has these, I know, but everyone's sort of ashamed and doesn't talk that much about them. But we happened across a hidden collection recently in a store in Sighthill that had been left from the 80s. And the reason it was left was that it's ephemera. So it was leaflets and pamphlets and things, and there was a shortage of staff at the time, and it was decided that it would prioritise cataloguing the hardbacked books. So this stuff didn't get catalogued, and one way or another, this little collection ended up going missing, and it was only just recently found. But within it, there were stories about the miners' strike, there were stories of the women's movement in the 80s. There's lots of things, and it's so interesting because as a library service, and this happens all over, decisions that we make have an impact on what stories are told and what is hidden. And Adele touched on this again in her talk, and this sort of mythology of neutral libraries. Well, there's nothing really neutral about it because we are making decisions all the time. And in public libraries, it could be decisions about what to buy, it could be decisions about what to promote, decisions are even about what's allowed to be lent, or to, we had collections in the past where people weren't allowed to see them or fear that it might disturb them too much or things. So I think as a profession, we need to be really, really conscious that is, and in the National Library, I'm so proud to come in to an organisation where so many staff are absolutely committed to that. And that's a journey that they've been on for a while now, and they really are trying to bring out those stories, and it's something we're so conscious of. And the reason I was mentioning to colleagues about Peely Wally, the thing that my mum was involved in, was that we have to actively go out and seek publications from people to deposit in legal deposits, particularly small publishers. And that could be some of the most interesting stuff in the future, those things that are on the margins at the moment that don't come in to the deposit. And that takes effort. And that's really a huge part of the story for the future, and really important that we collect widely, and that we tell the stories widely, and that we do so with a wide range of people.
Oh, it's incredible what the library is doing. And I know that a lot of your colleagues are here as well. And it's just been wonderful to see. And I think it's so, that idea of collections being too dangerous to read, that is very exciting in itself. I think some of you know that I'm a big fan of Radcliffe Hall. You can see her, I think, just about there in my screen, the banned books. There's such that idea of the kind of myth of the neutral is something that libraries, I think, are really starting to engage with. And I remember you mentioned Petticoats and Pinnacles, and Paula gave a great talk a few months ago about how even the issue of names in that exhibition as well, the fact that when a woman married, they would use not only her husband's surname, but her husband's first name as well. So therefore, you've no idea if this is the same woman or a different one. And just that kind of anonymizing by these kind of pernicious, subtle ways, and even more so in the stories that you're encountering now.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that's such a great point.
We've got so many questions and chats coming in. This is amazing. I've got one question. Actually, how, for kind of newer professionals or younger professionals, do you have any advice on how to deal with inequalities or toxic masculinity in the workplace, especially when, as we've touched on, even if it's perpetuated by women themselves for the reasons that we've maybe discussed? Do you have any kind of top tips to share?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think finding your supporters and your tribe, I've always found incredibly satisfying, finding other like-minded people, whether they be women or men or, whoever, that you can actually rant with and say, wow, this is crazy. And then I would say, organize yourselves, be open, challenge things. I'm not suggesting this is something I personally have been brilliant at doing throughout my career. That's something I think is interesting. That's been that shift actually recently. But just providing a platform for conversations and including people in those, I think is so important. You know, just supporting other people and thinking of ways that you can have those discussions, and that you can, subtle things can actually have a big impact and make a big change. I mean, some of the stuff that's happening now around LGBT promotion, LGBTQIA, and, you know, all that sort of thing is just incredible. And librarians have an opportunity to promote those collections, those books, to increase discussion and conversation around those areas. And even 10, 20 years ago wasn't really the case, you know. And I suppose maybe because I'm getting long in the tooth now, and when you said 20 years, it's actually more than 25 years. Like, it just is unbelievable how long I've been working, I suppose.
Not possible, the maths don't add up, Amina.
It does. But in actual fact, I have seen so much change in that time, like an enormous amount. And you just don't think that that's possible, really. You know, you don't think that's going to happen when you're young. And I was talking to some Kickstarter trainees at work, they're in their early 20s, and they were talking about imaging. You know, they were laughing almost at something I was telling them about when I did a digitization project in the past, and we put them on CD-ROMs, thinking people will be able to access these CD-ROMs in the future, you know, or floppy disks. You know, they were like, whoa, you're crazy. And I said, well, you don't know yet how much is going to change, which is why we need to really think about that, you know, things that are going to change in the future. And that's what I would say, have hope. Things can change. You can change it. It's actually up to you. And yeah, I'm looking to all of the young people that are going to be the ones that will be the future, supporting all of us, you know. So it's really, really important that you feel that sense of empowerment, that you can change things and you can call things out, and just naming it, and it is in itself really important. But also you've got so many great ways now to connect with people through social media, you know, through groups and things, but also just talk to people. I think one of the things that I miss so much about the online world post-pandemic, when we don't get to talk, is these sideways conversations where you actually know about people's lives, and then you understand the challenges that other people are going through, and talk to people who aren't like you, who are from a different generation from you, a different background to you. Find out about their lives, and that'll help you understand what you can do together to reach out. I think that's really, really important.
That's amazing, and it echoes what's coming through in the chat as well. Philip is saying being prepared to learn from folk younger than you as well as older, and everybody's saying it's just that sharing of ideas, isn't it, which in itself I think ties really profoundly to what you mentioned earlier, that you don't need to know it all, even if you are right at the top or any level. It's, you know, everybody's got a contribution.
Well, look at the whole climate justice campaign being led by a 16-year-old girl. I mean, that's phenomenal. Like, you would never think that that was the case, that would ever happen. You think that people in power, but actually, often people can really speak truth to power. And Amanda Gorman, I know, is up there on there. There's something really interesting going on at the moment. I think that there's a real opportunity to capitalize on. And yes, I absolutely think that people older, I see that learning from younger people is really important. And young people in the profession have really, really impressed me. They're so tuned into the values of being a librarian. I think I hear so much more about that now from young people than I ever did from 20 years ago. I think it's really amazing.
Oh, and it's coming through loud and clear today, everyone. So thank you so much for sharing all these ideas. I know there's been a great conversation going on as well about being single and child-free and the assumptions that people bring to that. I've felt that myself, you know, in a workplace or beyond. So I do see you.
Yep.
That's great. I think it just actually, even creating this space, it reflects that sense of community and the benefit of talking to each other and being able to share these stories. I'm conscious of time. If you can believe it, we've only got a few minutes left. I know this is a tricky one, Amina, but I wonder if we could conclude with what's one thing that you would say to a woman just entering the library profession?
Welcome. I don't know, just it's such a brilliant, I have had the most amazing time in libraries, and I see many of my friends in this audience here, people, I have met so many of my closest friends, I met my partner in the libraries, you know, this is a profession of people who are care, and maybe we don't always get everything right, you know, but we're on a journey of learning, and we have amazing organizations like CILIP and CILIPS and, you know, others that, and SLIC that bring us together as well, that we've got a common person across sectors, across ages, across location, wherever you are, you know, that, and actually that's incredible, and we should make more use of that. But what I would say is welcome. It's a fantastic environment to be in, and we need you.
Oh, well, there's our first line. And actually what we'd love to do for the few minutes that are remaining is open that up to everyone here. So please use the chat box or the raise hand function and add a message to a female new professional. And what we're hoping to do is, if we get enough, for International Women's Day, we're going to turn this into CILIPS's letter to a new woman. So if you can just take a few minutes and we will share those ideas. I mean, you've already shared so much. It's just been absolutely wonderful to see.
Thank you all so much. It's so amazing to see all your comments and for like to feel that sense of conversation. So thank you.
And I think all that really is left is to say thank you so much to you, Amina. It has been just incredible. I could keep you here all day, all weekend, and I think we still wouldn't get to the heart of all that you can share with us. These have been such kind of real, rich, authentic insights, and can really tell that it's been so appreciated. Scotland's libraries are very lucky indeed to have a woman like you at the helm, and us to have you at the heart of CILIPS. You're such a literal inspiration.
Oh, not at all. Not in any way. I am made of all of you that I've all been, like all the people that I've had the absolute pleasure and privilege to work with and know, and I'm really, really lucky. So yeah, thank you so much for coming along, and thanks again, Kirsten. Really, I'm really pleased that you've sort of been able to make this space, and I think it's brilliant, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of these folk in the room today doing their inspirations, because I know they've got just as interesting stories to tell.
Oh, well, you heard it here first. We would love to continue the series. So, and in fact, speaking of Dundee and strong women, we're going to have a special inspiration at the Dundee conference as well. So make sure you join us there for our first ever in-person inspiration.
Oh, please do. I hope I do see all of you in Dundee at CILIPS. I'd love to. Thanks.
So I'll hang on for a couple of minutes more, just if anyone's got any last comments, or I think that was pretty comprehensive what we've covered, but we're still here. And if you have any comments, recommendations, you know, we're here. We'd love to hear from you at CILIPS. But I think, yeah, just thank you so much, Amina. It's been the most incredible morning.
Oh, not at all. It's good to get that Friday buzz. Yes, thank you to all of you. If I see Fiona clapping there.